Welcome to Eric Unscripted. So I try to read a lot, maybe as you can see, because I feel it helps me do my job better. I need to be well informed, and I love science and history and psychology, and I feel like the job I do only makes sense through the lens of biology, history, and psychology, and I'm a science teacher. Also, it's just a lot of fun. The latest book, I just finished this the other day, is Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. My sister bought this for me for Christmas, and when I finally got down to reading it, I went through the whole thing in just a couple days. If I wasn't teaching and doing other stuff, I probably would have read the whole thing in one day. It was just so interesting, but I only have so many hours in a day. There's a huge amount of really interesting stuff in here, but in particular, the section on suicide really got me thinking about in a couple of issues, really one main issue, which is that of guns in the United States, that I think of not as much these days. We had so many school shootings in about a 2-year period there a couple of years ago that this just consumed me all the time, especially being a teacher. And I pored over the data and I looked at it and I listened to hours and hours of people talking about this on YouTube, looking at the problem. And I really lean a particular way on this. I don't really think it's political. I just think it's based on evidence. Like, what is the thing we can do to help reduce our huge numbers of homicides and suicides in this country that we have? But I do really want to talk about suicide first. Suicide, like, as an idea, and how people really mischaracterize people's motives, people's intentions, and a few other things. And that's brought up in the book here. So one of the big ideas about suicide in this book is that it's coupled. And coupling is an idea where things that people do, actions they do, are tied specifically to a certain thing. So what do I mean? With suicides, there's a few different things. There's this famous poet, Sylvia Plath, who chose to kill herself in a particular way, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about the Golden Gate Bridge. That's brought up in here. So what is it that people say about suicide and enacting measures to try to reduce suicide? Well, what people say about it, and there's actually some quotes in here that people have actually said. I'm just going to read one of them. People bent on suicide will find many ways to do away with themselves. Pills, hanging, drowning, cutting arteries, jumping off of any bridge or building. I oppose the construction of a suicide barrier, and this is a net under the Golden Gate Bridge to catch people who jump off of it, because it would waste money and achieve nothing. And that sort of sentiment is repeated over and over again. People who are going to kill themselves if we got rid of handguns would just do it a different way. And it's the same story with homicides. People are just gonna, well, if we ban guns, then people are just gonna buy knives and make bombs and kill each other that way. That is wrong. And we have data to demonstrate this. The first really amazing point on this, brought up in the book here, is if people who were going to kill themselves are so hell-bent on doing it, they're going to do it no matter what, well then we should be able to find patterns on that. So specifically, there was a psychologist who followed up on 515 people who attempted to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, but were unsuccessful. Now, if we follow people's intuition on this, then those 515 people who were determined to kill themselves, they were unsuccessful the first time, we should expect to see the vast majority of them then attempt suicide or successfully commit suicide in a different way. Now, you can argue that the first failed attempt at suicide was a wake-up call to them and they got things straightened out. Sure, I can believe that there is a certain percentage of people where that is the case. However, of those 515 people, 25 of them later went on to kill themselves. This is incontrovertible that these people were determined to kill themselves by jumping off of the Golden Gate Bridge. So no, it is not the case that they would do it by any other means. That simply doesn't play out in this data here. And this is hardly the only example of this. In the book, the poet Sylvia Plath, she killed herself by carbon monoxide poisoning by sticking her head in a gas oven. Now, natural gas today is methane. There's no carbon monoxide in it. But in many decades ago, like in the 40s and 50s and whatever, it was up to 10 to 20% carbon monoxide, the gas that came out of these stoves. There are charts in the book that outline this, but essentially suicide rates in the UK, after the UK went ahead and mandated, we are no longer using what's called coal gas that has all this carbon monoxide. We are switching over strictly to natural gas, which is pretty much just methane. The suicide rate in the country plummeted. So no, people did not choose other methods to take their own lives. People instead had their lives saved through this. Now, if we look at suicide in the United States, it is a very significant cause of death. Overall, suicide is actually the 10th leading cause of death at 47,000. This is for the year 2017, 47,173. I'm going to be comparing the United States to the UK because they, like us, are an English-speaking, industrialized, westernized country. In 2017, in the United States, there were a total of 48,800 suicides. In the United Kingdom, there were 5,778. Now, we have more people than them. We have 4.92 times as many people. I'm just going to say it's 5. So we take 5,778 times 5. If we pretend that the United Kingdom has the same population size as the United States, then the total number of suicides is 28,890. Whereas in the United States, again, it was 20,000 more than that, 48,800. And I genuinely feel it is completely fair to put a huge amount of blame on this in the easy access to firearms that we have in this country. Firearms and suicide is very strongly coupled. Most people that are killed by guns are actually killed through self-inflicted harm. It's suicide. 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicide. And half of all suicides in general are caused by guns. And firearms are extremely effective and deadly. Firearms have a fatality rate of 82.5%, according to the book here, with suicides. But pills, or really it's drug or poison ingestion of any kind, that is only 1.5% successful. Guns are more than 50 times more deadly than these pills. The fact is that the firearm suicide rate in America is 10 times higher than that of other westernized high-income countries. And if we want to get serious about reducing our suicide numbers and our homicide numbers, which we'll jump into next, then we have to seriously look at changing the kinds of firearms we have access to in this country. I know that this is a huge, argued over issue, but there's nothing left to cling on to except for ideology and blind fear. The government is not waiting to pass gun laws to take us all over and turn us into Stalinist Russia. I'm sorry to have to say that there's no excuse for that kind of mode of reasoning. Are there historical examples? Yes. Does the United States in any way fit those historical models? Absolutely not. And because I believe in the scientific method and evidence-based inquiry, then we can look to other parts of the world and see, well, they decided to get rid of their guns. Has the government taken them over? No. It has not happened in any westernized, industrialized, educated, democratic country. And it's not going to happen. Let's just look at the homicide statistics in the United States in general. In 2017, there were 19,510 homicides in the United States. That's an insanely high number. That's the number I get from the CDC. Our World in Data has a very slightly different number, 19,880. If we look at the United Kingdom, the total amount of homicides was 355. Now we're going to take that times 5 to scale it up to be more fair. But that still only gives us 1,775 homicides compared to the United States' almost 20,000. Our per capita homicide rate is well over 11 times that of this other country. And they do have a very large population. It's almost 67 million people, and it's a small country. So you have the population density of it is much, much greater than it is in the United States. London is a much larger city than New York or Los Angeles is. So yes, there are differences between us, but they don't tease apart the problem as thoroughly as somebody might be motivated to argue that it does. And when it comes to those 19,510 homicides in the United States, 14,542 of them were committed with firearms. This means that 74.5% of all homicides are carried out by guns. Or in other words, you take everything else combined, double it, and you're still nowhere close to the amount of homicides that are carried out by guns. Now, I've had conversations with people on this who, they just don't know anything about the topic. I've heard there's a guy who I know who works at a gun store. He said that more people are killed each year by hammers and knives and things like that than by guns. And at the time, I'm really mad at myself. This is many years ago, and at the time I didn't know what the actual stats were. But he was so wrong, it's unbelievable. He had to have just made that up on the spot, or he heard some pundit or news thing say that, and it's a complete lie. Now, I don't think he was lying. I think he didn't know anything about the actual stats or the truth of it. And people, it's gonna go back to the exact same thing. So what? If we take away the guns, then murders in other types of things are just going to skyrocket. Absolutely not. There's no reason to think so. In other countries where they have banned guns or banned most types of guns or made it difficult, they don't have murder rates like ours does. The handgun single-handedly, well, not single-handedly, but the handgun is by far the most significant thing that has our homicide rate way, way, way up here. Even if we do take away all of those murders carried out with firearms, that leaves us with just shy of 5,000 homicides for the year. And the UK, as we saw, if we adjust their population up to ours, they have not quite 1,800 homicides. So we still seem to have a problem with killing each other in this country, and I don't have an answer or solution to that. But you can't ignore the thing that accounts for 75% of all homicides. As a matter of fact, if we look at homicide as a cause of death, this should almost make you sick. It makes me feel absolutely terrible. If we look at the 10 leading causes of death by age group for 2017, all of the numbers I'm getting are from 2017. But homicide is one of the top 10 leading causes of death all the way from birth until the age of 54. Now, in some of these age groups, it's really low. For example, there were 154 people between the ages of 5 and 9 killed by homicide. Now, 154 is an extremely small number in a country as large as ours. It should be 0. Absolutely, it should be 0. But it's rather small. However, homicide is the third leading cause of death from people ages 15 all the way to age 34, and then it's the fifth leading cause of death for people ages 35 to 44. And the numbers are enormous. From 15 years old up to 24, there were over 4,900 people killed that year from homicide. From 25 to 34, it bumps way up to 5,488. And then the last age bracket there, it's 3,351. This is unheard of in civilized parts of the world. Homicide being the third leading cause of death for people between the ages of 15 and 34. This is so tragic. These are our kids we're talking about. Now, something that makes me almost more angry is the way this is played off in a way that is completely racist, even though I don't think these people are trying to be. They chalk this up to, yeah, that's because of black people. Or they'll just say gangs, which is the black people and the Mexicans, I guess. There are white people in gangs, but that's really not acknowledged. First of all, why would you say something like that? I care deeply that there is a homicide problem in the African American community in this country, but I don't want that to be the case. I want everybody's numbers to drop way, way, way down. When you chalk it off as just gang violence, to me it says, yeah, that's just the trash taking itself out. As long as it's those kids and those brown people in the gangs killing each other, then why should I really care? It's such an infuriating thing to say. Now, nobody spells it out like that. And I've never heard anybody confront somebody in that way when they make that point, but there's nowhere that argument leads other than to that, really. And again, these are our kids. It's unheard of anywhere for teenagers to have homicide be the third leading cause of death. And tragically, right here with that, just above homicide for each of those three age brackets is suicide. And we know that half of those suicides at least are going to be carried out with a firearm. Suicide and homicide are coupled to these items. And I'll say it again, there really is no argument other than one on principle or fundamentalism or fear. Deeply uninformed fear, unrealistic fear. We have everything to gain by doing something about this. We're talking about roughly 15,000 deaths a year, the vast majority, way more than 90% of which would not occur in any other way if we got rid of these, and it's the same story with suicide. The thought of suicide is paralyzing. It's terrifying to so many people, but the idea of taking your life in an instant with a firearm makes that act easier to carry out. I don't like talking about this right now. It makes me uncomfortable. But the most serious issues, yeah, they are deeply uncomfortable to talk about, and we can never expect them to get better if we don't confront them and talk about them in an honest way. In the United Kingdom, where firearms just really aren't a thing there, they had 32 gun homicides, 355 total homicides, 32 of which were carried out with a firearm. In the United States, we had almost 15,000 gun homicides. There is absolutely no compensation for the fact that they do not have firearms in that country for homicide. They're not doing it in different ways, or at least they're not making up for it in different ways. It's really heartbreaking to me that this issue just can't be talked about in a productive, intelligent way. We know through studies done by psychologists that when you take people on really polarizing issues and you show them data on that issue, all it does is make them even more polarized. They dig their heels in even more on their issue. You look at gun violence and you show them how, well, basically you could show them all the stuff I talked about, but do it in a way more sophisticated way, spell it out more plainly, and they will still maintain that either there isn't a gun problem or we still shouldn't do anything about it, or that it's caused by things that are just completely made up, or that it's the blacks, or whatever. It doesn't seem to really work. It doesn't really seem to matter. And I don't know whether or not I should be hopeful about this at all. The only significant change I can think to do with this is to absolutely get rid of the ability for organizations to lobby in Congress. that is where the laws are passed. Most people in this country want something to happen with gun reform, but nothing ever happens. Most people in this country want to restructure our health care in some way to make it mostly, if not totally, socialized, but nothing ever happens. And lobbying is, to me, it's the most significant factor in all of this, because it breeds corruption, and it makes politicians not do things, because who cares if 50 million people want them to do something? This guy over here, or this organization, is going to give me $50 million for my next campaign so that I stay in office. Until we make lobbying illegal, that is something we could talk about at length, and I'm not going to. But I don't see anything on this issue and many other issues ever getting better. And it really breaks my heart, because you simply can't give people the facts. For some reason, we're just too goddamn stupid in this country for that. But the big takeaways from this, really it comes down to what Malcolm was talking about in this book, and that's the idea of coupling. Stop saying that people that are suicidal are hell-bent and they're going to do it no matter what we do. It isn't true. We have not anecdotal evidence, but statistical evidence that says that that's not true. And we could severely alleviate our homicide problem in this country by taking certain intelligent measures. We have evidence to back that up. Not anecdotal, but real good evidence. Now I do, if I could wave a magic wand and all of a sudden my solution would be proposed. I mean, I do kind of have one in my mind about what I would do. I wouldn't make every kind of gun illegal. There's no need for that. And I really, the types of guns that I would allow, I really wouldn't make it as that much more difficult to obtain them than it already is. The reason we have such catastrophically high rates of school shootings and homicides or whatever is because if somebody just wants to get their hands on a gun to kill people, then they have an incredibly easy time of doing that. I could really go on and on with this topic, but I am doing this unscripted. I really just kind of started doing this out of the blue. So I've sort of hit a wall here on how I want to go about talking about this, but those are my thoughts on all of this. And honestly, I mean, as honest as I can tell you, this is not based really on any kind of politics or anything like that. I only look at the world and look at these issues in terms of evidence-based and statistics-based, and I don't cling to ideologies or anything like that. If I have one ideology when it comes to this, it's preventing deaths. That wraps up this. Maybe this will make 1 million people hate me. Maybe only 20 people will ever watch this video. Who knows? But in any case, thank you for watching, and let me know what you think.